Hello students, welcome to English class. Today we are supposed to learn the grammar part of your English reader textbook. And the topic we need to learn today is all about clauses. You might have learned in the previous class about clause, isn't it? And we know that the clause can be broadly classified to two types. Which are they? It is main clause or the dependent clause and main clause or the independent clause and subordinate clause or the dependent clause. Main clause or the main clause or the independent clause and subordinate clause or the dependent clause. And you know what a clause is. A clause is a group of words that forms a part of sentence and has a subject and predicate of its own. That is, a clause will be a part of sentence which has got both subject and predicate and hence capable of conveying a particular meaning by itself. But again, this clause is divided to main clause and subordinate clause. Let's check what is meant by this main clause and subordinate clause. Let's analyze this example. When the giant arrived, he saw the children playing in the garden. That is what you are supposed to do as per the questions given in your textbook is a sentence will be given. And in that sentence, a part of sentence will be underlined. You have to identify whether the underlined part of the sentence is dependent clause or independent clause. Dependent means subordinate clause. Dependent meaning subordinate clause. And independent means what? Independent means main clause. So if it is dependent, it will be subordinate clause, and independent means it will be main clause. You just need to identify that. That is, in the sentence, part of sentence will be underlined beforehand. In the question paper itself, part of sentence will be underlined. And you will be asked to identify whether the underlined part is dependent or independent clause or main clause or subordinate clause. So, let's check this example. He saw the children playing, when the giant arrived, he saw the children playing in the garden. When the giant arrived is one clause. And he saw the children playing in the garden is another clause. So what we are supposed to do is we have to identify, which one is the main clause and which is the subordinate clause. So this is one part of the sentence and this is the other. It is very easy to identify which one is main clause and which is subordinate clause. Hear it properly. Main clause. Main clause always begins with the subject. Just check this one. It begins with he. He is a subject, isn't it? So main clause begins with a subject. Whenever a part of sentence is beginning with the subject, no doubt it will be main clause. Now check the second part. When the giant arrived. Here, which is the word that begins a sentence? It is when. Is it a subject? No, subject is coming after this particular word when. That is, before the subject, we have got a word called when. And we call such words as connectors. We call it as connectors. So, if a sentence is starting with words like when or any such, because, since, etc., we call all those things as connectors. If it is beginning with any such connectors, then that part of sentence or that particular clause will become which clause? It will be subordinate clause. It will become subordinate clause. Whereas this one, since it is starting with a subject called he, we can call it as main clause. Did you understand it, children? And moreover, if you're going to check the meaning of the sentence, I'll read it out once. Hope you have understood till here. What is the main thing? If the sentence is beginning with a subject means name of person, place or thing. If a sentence begins with name of person, place or thing, we call it as subject. If it is beginning with the subject, then that is the main clause. On the other hand, if it is beginning with connectors like since, as, because, etc., then we call it as subordinate clause or dependent clause. Is it clear for you? Now, let's check out the meaning of the sentence once more. He saw the children playing in the garden. If I am coming and telling you, he saw the children playing in the garden, does it make a complete sense? It makes a complete sense. He saw the children playing in the garden. Do you need something more to complete its meaning? No. So, the part of sentence which makes the complete sense can also be called as main clause. That is also one method of identifying whether it is main clause or subordinate clause. Now, take this part, second part, when the giant arrived. I am coming and telling you one day, when the giant arrived. Does it make complete sense? If I say the giant arrived, it makes complete sense. The giant arrived. But if I am telling when the giant arrived, does it make complete sense? No. It requires some more information to complete its meaning, isn't it? That is, because of the presence of this word when, it doesn't make a complete sense. When is what? When is the connector. So, because of the presence of this word term when, it is not making a complete sense. And the part of sentence which cannot make complete sense is what we call as subordinate clause. Subordinate clause is also called as dependent clause. Main clause is also called as independent clause. Now, let's see which are the commonly used connectors. I told you the part of sentence which begins with the connector comes under the category of dependent clause or subordinate clause. So, which are the commonly used connectors? It includes words like after, before, for, although, when, if, since, in order to, though, unless, while, as, since, because, until, etc. If the part of sentence begins with any of these words, then no doubt it will be subordinate clause. Subordinate clause. Reason is Because of the presence of these words, the meaning of that part of sentence will not be complete. Now, for your understanding, for your better understanding, we'll do few more exercise. This is the underlined portion. You have to identify whether it is dependent clause or independent clause. Even though I was busy. What is the clause given here? Underlined word given here. Underlined clause given here. Is it main clause or subordinate clause? Even though I was busy. Is it starting with the subject? Is it starting with name of person, place or thing? No. It is starting with a particular word called even though. Isn't it? It is starting, it has begun with a particular word called even though. Even though comes under the category of connectors. Isn't it? So, this part of sentence is what one? Main clause or subordinate? It is no doubt subordinate. Clear? Now check the next example. Underlined portion is he revised properly for the exam. Although he was sick, he revised properly for the exam. Now tell me, what is this part? Take the first word in it. First word is he. Is he name of person, place or thing? Is it a subject? Is it a name of person, place or thing? Of course. He means it is person, pronoun of a person. Right. So, what is this part? Is it main clause or subordinate clause? It is main clause. Simple, no? You can do it, right? Okay. Hope you have understood this part. Now, let's do this example. The e-teaching class will continue until the problems related to COVID-19 pandemic ends. It ends. The e-teaching class will continue until the problems related to COVID-19 pandemic ends. So, identify the clause here. Is it main clause or a subordinate clause? In order to identify, circle the first term, which is the first word here, until. Until, is it name of person, place or thing? No doubt, it is a connector. So, it has begun with a connector. So, what is this? Is it main clause or subordinate clause? It will be subordinate clause. Isn't it? It is subordinate clause. Now, let's analyze the next example. You will be punished if you do not adhere to the rules of the company. Underlined term is you will be punished. What should you do, children? Circle the first word. What is the first word? You. Is it name of person, place or thing? Yes, it is a subject, right? It comes under the pronoun, right? It is subject. So, since it has begun with a subject, what can you call this part of sentence? It is main clause or it is independent clause. Isn't it? So, this is how we need to identify which is the main clause and which is the subordinate clause, or which is the dependent and the independent clause. Few exercises are given in your textbook, page number 10, grammar study, question number H. Do it as homework and submit it to me. Hope you have understood the topic with Start today. So, we'll wind up our class here. So, goodbye.